Good afternoon, everybody. It's time for Throwback Thursday. I am DeSoto Brown, speaking to you from Bishop Museum Archives. I'm the Bishop Museum historian, and today I ask the question, do you want to go to a show? Shall we go to a show? It's showtime. Where are we going to go see the show? That's the question. And depending on what time it was and what time period it was, if you were in Honolulu, there were different places to go to all different types of shows and different types of entertainment. So let's look at some of those. And some you may remember if you're old enough, some you may never have heard of. To begin with, there was something called the Opera House. Here's a photograph of the Opera House in 1910. Now, just because it's called the Opera House doesn't mean they actually did any operas there. That's a really exalted, highfalutin name for essentially just an auditorium, but a nice auditorium. The Opera House, the first Opera House, was built probably in the 1880s. It was burned in a fire and then it was refurbished. And so this picture you're looking at is the refurbished newer Opera House. The Opera House was located at the intersection of King Street and Mililani Street, meaning that it was just about across the street from Iolani Palace, and the entire block that where the Opera House was, as well as a bunch of other buildings, was cleared to build what's called the Federal Building, and a lot of us know it as the old downtown post office. And this is the inside of the Opera House. So it's kind of a, you see, it's a nice looking place. We have a full house in this photograph, which again was taken in 1910. It looks like what we would think a movie theater would look like, and old movie theaters did look like this, but the Opera House actually was constructed and used before movies were ever shown in the Hawaiian Islands. And actually, if I remember correctly, the first time movies ever were shown in Hawaii, which was in 1897, they were shown here in this same auditorium of the Opera House that you're looking at right now. All right. Well, so the Opera House went out of existence by about 1920, and then there were various other places that came along for different types of entertainment, and one of them was the Honolulu Stadium. This is a photograph of a Boy Scout event in the original old Honolulu Stadium in about 1940. The Honolulu Stadium opened in the late 1920s, and one of the amazing things in retrospect is that it had absolutely no provision for parking. So by the 1970s, because it existed up till the middle 1970s, if you went to an event there that was very well attended, you had to drive all over the place looking for a place to park on the street, and that is something that we can't even conceive of now. The Honolulu Stadium, even though it was an outdoor stadium, did host a number of different types of events, and I'm going to ask you a question about those types of events when we get to the end of this little session that we're in. Now, something else that existed in Honolulu was the Civic Auditorium. Civic Auditorium opened in 1933, and it was a privately owned, plain concrete building, and just like the Honolulu Stadium, because there weren't a lot of places to do various types of shows or entertainment, the Civic Auditorium got used for lots of different types of events. So this picture from the middle 1950s, you can see on the marquee, it says that there's a roller derby coming up, and there's also boxing. There were also a lot of wrestling matches there, but it was also where, for example, the Honolulu Symphony would perform. I remember going to a Honolulu Symphony program for kids at the Civic Auditorium, which was really kind of a dump. It had a plain concrete interior. The bleachers were just concrete. But again, it had hosted all different types of events. This picture is a hula presentation, as you can see, in about 1935. And one of the interesting things about the interior of the Civic was that it had a lot of big signs in it, and billboard-like signs, which we didn't have anywhere else. So when you look at pictures of the inside of the Civic, you can sometimes date them based on what the signs are that are visible up at the top, above the highest bleachers. And they're having a good time, but I can tell you they're not very comfortable sitting on those bleachers. Here in the middle 1950s is the interior of the Civic Auditorium, set up for the roller derby. And if you look right here, there's the penalty box
If you remember the roller derby, if you did something bad, they made you sit in this little enclosure on a folding chair. That was the penalty box. And this is a really good, clear view of the interior of the Civic. The Civic was demolished in 1974, and there is a high-rise on its space today. It was located on King Street. If you're traveling on King Street, it was before the intersection with K.A. Moku Street, and it was on the Mauka side of the street. Well, the Civic Auditorium's functions were replaced in the early 1960s by the construction of what was called the Honolulu International Center, and we called it the HIC for short. And when it was renamed the Blaisdell Center, I can assure you it was a very difficult thing to learn to call it something different. And it was a very hard thing to say Blaisdell instead of HIC. This is the arena at the Honolulu International Center as it looked shortly about the time that it opened, which I think was 1964. And in addition to the arena, of course, there are the meeting rooms, which have been upgraded in the ensuing years, I'm happy to say. And there's also the concert hall. So finally, Honolulu did have a really decent place to put on all different types of shows. And it's still the place which does get used for all different types of shows over the years. We've been to many, many things there. Okay, so that's just an overview of some of those different places, the venues where we could have gone to a show. And now it's time for our weekly question. And we're going back to the Honolulu Stadium. Here's the question. Which of the following things did not happen at the Honolulu Stadium? 1, rodeos. Here's a rodeo. And you can see it's Hawaii's finest and fastest rodeo. And look at that rodeo action with those cowboys. Yep, right here in Honolulu. Okay, that's one thing. The next thing is, were there ever any car races at Honolulu Stadium? And this is a picture of what's called a stock car in the 1950s. It was sponsored by the General Trading Company Limited on Waiakamilo Road. Stock car races involved cars that were maybe 10 or 15 years old that had been changed a little bit, but basically they still had their stock bodies. And finally, of the three things that might have happened at the Honolulu Stadium, was there an Elvis Presley concert at the Honolulu Stadium? And there's Elvis with some hula girls arriving on a ship in 1957 in Honolulu. So, to recap, the question is, which of the following things did not happen at the original Honolulu Stadium? Was it rodeo? Was it car racing? Was it an Elvis Presley concert? And I'll give you a hint. It's a trick question. All right, that's it for this week. I'm DeSoto Brown, Bishop Museum historian, calling you from Bishop Museum Archives, Bishop Museum. And want to tell you to come down and visit us in person if you can, and if not, to come visit us electronically at bishopmuseum.org. That's our website address right there. And if not, just come on by and see what's going on in the Bishop Museum website and see what various wonderful things we will be doing and are doing right now for your entertainment, because it may not be a place for shows necessarily, but there's a lot of entertainment happening at Bishop Museum too, and it's educational as well. So till next week and next Throwback Thursday, this is DeSoto Brown saying aloha.